have a quorum.
Yeah, Becca's on the phone.
Okay, we're going to move on to Better Places program. So, David, what we have agreed to in our committee is we haven't gotten into the language very much, but we have reduced the program appropriations from 5 million to 1 million. Um, I have a similar concern as we talked about in terms of marketing and tourism. I think uh, sets up another special fund in Title 32, Chapter 7, Subchapter 5. David, what does that cross-reference appears in a lot of places? Is that,
Yeah.
could you just tell us what that's about? Is that where you like draw
Yeah.
warrants down on the
That's
fund?
a stock, that subchapter deals with the creation and the management of special funds. So every time we create a special fund that is got to be separately accounted for within the system, you have to say that it's managed according to that, and that has practices, as you suggested, about warrants, how you move the money, who keeps up with it. Um, you know, I seem to remember a couple of years ago, the administration and the Joint Fiscal Office tallied it up and found that there were, at this point, over 100, if not more, special funds, and it was really kind of a pain in the rear to keep up with all of them. And they asked us to stop making special funds, but they keep happening. But yeah, that's the subchapter that deals with how you manage these segregated accounts.
Okay. So, yeah, I've come around more on this program, but it is being presented to us as a pilot. This is one-time money at this point. The Appropriations Committee has not viewed this as part of the base. And I, I'm not sure they can't do the accounting around this without establishing a special fund. So I, for one, would just like to, give it to a division within ACCD or to ACCD to
Well,
issue these grants without having to. Uh, I mean, I guess one of the reasons for having special funds, and it may be appropriate here, is that it probably says something that this fund can consist of here, composed of the following: state and federal funds, gifts, grants, other
right.
contributions to the fund, any
It,
interest earned by the fund.
it,
Um,
exactly. And I also think, to go to one of your favorite words, it puts guardrails around the spending of it. And it also allows for a variety of funding sources to go into it. So for those reasons, I think that that's one of the reasons they want a special fund. And it's no skip. I mean, I don't think it's not an expense issue. I would leave it as requested.
just
Oh, there, Ken has joined us.
all
We
right.
haven't heard any objection to a special fund from
Yeah, I don't either.
finance and management, have we?
No, no.
And I mean, it certainly, in a way, having a special fund enables us, I think, to better track the money. And so
Yeah.
from a control standpoint, rather than it being lost in an Excel spreadsheet someplace within the department, it probably does provide slightly better guardrails. And, absence any objection because of administrative complexity or other reasons, I'd be inclined to leave it alone.
Yeah.
I think we can certainly ask the question as to, from finance and management, if there are any objections from the administration, but otherwise, I don't see any great harm.
Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
this is a proposal from the administration,
Right.
so I assume that they're okay with it. I mean, I don't think, for instance, like in tourism marketing, we established a special fund for their outreach, or in the relocated worker program, we didn't establish a special fund. But this is different in the sense, even though it's theoretically a pilot and there's only 1 year of funding, it is different because it's so tied into the crowdsourcing and other monies being raised. So I'll move away from that. Let's look at the language here. There's a lot of words here. House is really big on findings and purposes, but let's, take our time and just read through this, whether we have any concerns with this in terms of any changes we would like to see. I think it's about 4 pages long.
No, I think it's all good. They've done a lot of work on this. This is actually the bill that upon which the rest of the economic development was hung. And I think they've done a particular good amount of work on this because they had the pilot that they did this summer. So I think it's good. I think it's good to go. We just have changed the amount.
Okay. I want to talk about the size of the grants and the matching funds.
It doesn't talk about the size, does it?
There's a minimum and maximum.
It's the crowdfunding of, it's the stipulation of a trigger that would enable them.
Okay, wait a second.
I see the under 2, 4, the minimum amount of a grant award is 5,000 and the maximum would be 50. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
That's on page 12, bottom of page 12.
Right. So I'm trying to see where, Senator Clarkson, the department may award a grant to a municipality, nonprofit. This is on page 12.
Yeah,
Create a new
I'm
public
fine
space,
with-
revitalize or activate. So where does, I'm just trying to, I know there's examples of like pocket parks and benches and walkways and,
yeah, no, they gave us some with their pilot this summer. They had much less money to play with. The only thing is I'm not sure I'd set a minimum amount because as we heard this from this summer, some of the needs are actually very small. They just need the stimulus to get going. But Chris isn't here to chat us through why they set I would say a fairly high minimum for what they had this summer, but I'm happy to leave it as it is. And again, we can talk about it in conference committee if we need to.
can you point to me where, I mean, I understand the physical changes to a downtown or neighborhood center or whatever. Where's the ability to award things like arts festivals and performances and those kinds of things?
So it's, if you're in the actual, not the findings and intent, but in the statutory draft itself, I
Yeah.
think you need to look at subsection C. And it is the definition of public space, which is quite broad. It's an area or place that is open and accessible to all people with no charge for admission. Includes village green squares, parks, centers, town halls, libraries, other publicly accessible buildings and connecting spaces like sidewalks, streets, alleys, and trails.
Right.
That's sort of the universe of the definition of public space, which is
right?
Right, so you could use this to establish a festival in a public space, like every Wednesday night, have a X event. Or you could use it for benches along the main street so that people could linger and have meet for picnics and,
Is the tie-in that you're talking about in subsection 2 where it says you can award a grant for a project that is located in a downtown, et cetera, that will create a new public space or revitalize or activate an existing public
Yes.
space? Does the word revitalize or activate says you want to have a film festival on the Village Green?
exactly.
That would be covered in that section. Is that what you think, David?
To be honest with you, I've not heard any testimony about these grants being linked to promoting a festival or a concert or anything like that. I've always heard it described as, more about the physical infrastructure that would facilitate things like that happening. So if you, as Senator Clarkson suggested, if you wanted to, accommodate your or fit out your village green or your park space so that it could host one of those events, then the grant would go to the infrastructure costs or the whatever it takes to make that happen with a stage or seating or whatever. I've actually not heard anybody suggest, the grants going specifically to support a film festival. So that's news to me, I guess, if that's one of the proposed intentions.
I think you're right, David. I think this is to enable those things, but that a festival would be run by whatever nonprofit in town, like Pentangle and Woodstock, would run that kind of a thing. But this would help revitalize and activate something that couldn't accommodate some of those things now. That is a public space. It's and it could be, just a lot of work on the landscaping or public picnic tables or just something that would make it possible and attractive for people to gather and meet and come downtown. The whole, I think, emphasis here is to encourage gathering and meeting and using downtowns in productive, positive ways and expand that.
Okay, so something like, I don't think it's existing anymore, but sort of, what is it? The walking of the hoofers in
The
Brattleboro.
walking of the heifers.
Rolling of the heifers.
The heifers in Brattleboro, is that, that's something that enterprise, which is a pretty big deal or was a pretty big deal at that time, this program couldn't give money to support that.
Right. I think this is more like the High Line in New York, recreating an abandoned elevated railroad section in the middle of town, which has become a magnet for people gathering and spending money, bringing lunches, picnics, doing stuff up on the High Line. This is it's sort of taking something that may be underused, blighted, vacant, or just underused and revitalizing it in some imaginative way that becomes a magnet for bringing people downtown to spend money and build community. So it's building community and spending money, I think, is what this is all about encouraging. And how do we enable that, and how these small grants, relatively small grants in the scheme of things, could really be catalysts. Again, it goes to our catalyst for change. That's a theme within all of our economic development, is we're wanting to be catalysts for change. And I think that's what this does. And I think actually the language is pretty good. I mean, they've worked hard on this. I think it's good. I think it says what we want it to say.
Okay, let's let's talk about some of the parameters in terms of the size of the grants and the matching requirements. One could assume that the 5,000, 50,000 is appropriate no matter how big this program is. But one could also argue, given that we've cut the funding by 80%, that we can't afford $50,000 grant awards or $5,000 minimums. And so that's one question. Let's talk about that. Does anybody have any feeling that given that we've reduced the funding significantly, maybe we should relook at the size of the awards? Because we're not, instead, if the average award in this range is $25,000, we've now limited to 40 awards as opposed to 200 awards that the House would have allowed for.
Yeah,
Maybe lowering it a little bit, but not necessarily proportionally. I mean, if we lower it proportionally, it's really nothing. It's like a
right.
for a pocket park,
Yeah, and part of me feels like they should go with this because that will make, that gives enough to be a substantive contribution and help. And then if they need to, this is going to be, as you have said, Mr. Chair, this is going to be a program that this is going to be another tool for our downtown redevelopment toolbox. And I view it as stimulating economic development. And if they run out of money in a year, they'll come back and ask for more. That doesn't bother me. And we will have ARPA money and we will have general fund money to decide what we want to do with. And if they run out of money, that's great. If we can see 40 fabulous projects in that short a time, I think it would be terrific. Their request list was very big, as I recall, even with their little amount of money they had this summer. But we could take it, as Keisha suggests, we could take it down to 3,000, but I wouldn't reduce it too much because, you also want to have impact, and a whole re-landscaping of something is expensive. We're doing one in Woodstock right now, which is ridiculous.
It's not worth the paper to reduce it.
Yeah.
The aggravation of grants that are, $5.
Yeah.
That doesn't make, I would keep the number up higher and just do a smaller number of projects.
Yeah.
If this is a proof of concept, we have next year to add to it.
Yeah, I would support that.
Okay. So leave the 5,000 and the 50,000 as is.
Yeah. Yeah, and if it uses up, I agree with Randy. It shows that it's a great success, and we can have a travel. It could be our field trip for next year, going around and seeing all these great things that have been redeveloped.
Okay. On page 13, I had a question of, as this is a pilot project, should we put any more requirements on the crowdfunding thing? Is one of the things that attracts me the most to this idea. I'm just wondering, they said that crowdfunding of not less than 25% and not more than 50% of the grant award. First of all, does anybody know why they would begrudge an applicant who raised 65% of the money for the project? So you can't get a grant award because you raised too much money?
I think they're really trying to emphasize community engagement here.
Right.
At least that's what I recall. And that that they would, I think that's a good question. It does seem silly that if you have got the 25% buy-in from the community and crowdfunding, you're not going to check that every crowdfunded source is a local resident. I mean, that crowdfunding could come from all over the world if people have relatives or people are second homes, or, you know, there's no guarantee that so I think the concern had been to, of course, to really have substantial community engagement, and that, but I agree with you that if there is more money that could come from elsewhere, why not? But it seems I can't remember what Chris's reason was for putting a cap on that 50% piece.
Well, does this encourage a community
Right.
that if it gets 51% to refund the 1% to the donor and use more of our money to complete the project? That doesn't make any sense to me.
Right. You raised that actually, Randy, when we were talking about it, is that why would you limit? I mean, other than the fact that we have a foundation of the, you know, not less than 25% has to be community engagement and fundraised by the community for the project. It is yes. That's a question for Chris. We could ask him.
I'm sort of thinking that we should pick a number and say that's the matching fund requirements for this grant. Many communities might have to go higher if they have big projects, and they can only get 50,000 from the state. And if the project is $100,000 project, they're going to have to raise 100% of the grant award to make the project go. So I think I might just say something like an applicant should provide matching fund raised through crowdfunding of not less than 50% of the grant award. And I'm not sure I like the idea that the department could go ahead and start moving this thing all around until we see how it works for the first year.
Well, I'd be more inclined to keep the floor of 25% as a minimum and simply drop the cap entirely.
Yeah.
Well, the concern I have with that is it could be a really, I think these were envisioned as small projects, and if a project comes in at, you know, several $100,000, it could really dilute the amount of projects that could be done. Keep in mind, when it says the applicant shall provide matching funds of such a percent of the grant award, when it says 50% of the grant award, that means if the grant award plus the fundraising is the total project cost, the fundraising is only a third of the project cost. Even though it says 50%, it's 50% of the grant award. So if you had $100,000, let's use the maximum award, $50,000. 50% of the grant award would be 25,000. So the total project would be 75,000. So the crowdfunding would only be a third of the project, which I think is reasonable, given people are touting this as being all about community involvement and how excited the community is. I would hate to see this get down to like only 12% of the whole project being from crowdfunding, which is what they're proposing here. Effectively, when they say crowdfunding should be 25% of the grant. We could say 25% of the project cost. That would make me feel better. But I don't know if people are following my math, but these numbers make it seem like there's a higher community interest than there really is.
Yeah, it would be ideal to have Chris weigh in on that, but, so in D, you would suggest editing this by adding not less than, 25% of the project cost?
Yes. Or change the number just to a straight 50% of the grant award. So the total amount of crowdfunding as a percentage of the total project is a third. I'd like to get up to a third as something that shows real community involvement.
You know, part of me is reluctant to change it just because they did this pilot. And I'm sure there's a reason for this. I mean, it's sort of,
Well, let's see.
some communities-
Nathan, can you see if you could reach out to Chris Cochran and see if he has any time this morning to join us?
and, Mr. Chair, while you're waiting for an answer from Sarah Buxton is resending. She did testimony to this effect. So when we're ready, I can fill you in on the Workforce Development Fund, and her testimony is on our website about why it's not good at this point. So I can fill you in when we want to chat about that again.
Okay. Nathan, are you with us?
I'm emailing Chris.
Okay, great. Okay, so that's, it seems like we're okay with the 5 and 50. This subsection D is the only section. How do people feel about, I think if this is a pilot program, I don't think we want to necessarily allow right from the get-go the department's ability to adjust the matching requirements. They could come back in January and say, we need a fix. We picked the wrong numbers, and we can discuss it then. But I mean, if they get very few applicants, I don't want to see them lowering the community involvement down to 5 or 10%. And the whole purpose of this is to do some matching funds, engage the community, take pride in the project. And if, you know, on $100,000 project, if they can only raise $5,000, I would be uncomfortable, but I'm willing to hear from others as to give them that flexibility at this point. And we can wait for Chris, obviously.
Yeah, I would move on, and unless Ken is here, maybe Ken has a notion. I mean, the department, the agency is here with Joan and Ken. So I don't know if they have anything to add.
Be happy to hear from either of you about what we've been talking about.
Yeah, I also sent a note to Chris about this.
Okay.
But yeah, your discussion, I think, you know, an important exploration of how this thing can really work.
Right.
If it's of any use, I do believe that House Commerce added the second clause in subdivision DD. I don't know that the department originally came with that, but Commerce wanted to add the ability to adjust that if there were more grants than they expected and they needed to give out less, or if there were fewer and they could give out more, and also to just accommodate you know, the different needs of different communities. Here's Chris. I'm sure he can expand upon that.
Chris, that was like magic. You know, that was instantaneous. Ken, you're
Yeah,
a miracle worker.
if only they could do like that background thing and do like a suit and tie for so apologize, I didn't get
Good morning,
my,
Chris.
my
So what we're discussing here is Better Places. And as you probably know, our Appropriations Committee is only recommending $1 million as opposed to $5 million. And we were talking about, given that, that's not to say that's where it's going to wind up ultimately, but given that, do we want to would it be appropriate to change the minimums and maximums of the grant award as proposed by the House? Or are those ideal regardless of how much money you have to work with? And then and tentatively, we agreed just to leave them there. But now we're on subsection D, which is the matching funds by crowdfunding. And we're trying to decide whether we want to give discretion to the agency to change the range of how much crowdfunding should be on any application, and if there should be a range or if there should be a fixed percent minimum, and if that and what that percentage might be.
Yeah, that's great. Good helpful context, and let me try to just jump into those questions. Yeah, definitely with a smaller amount of total funding, we looked at what the maximum grants were, and we asked our attorney to look at the range. I think it says a grant range between $20,000 and $50,000. And his opinion was the way it was written that we could lower the actual amount as it's written, and that's something that we would likely do. We would much rather reduce the amount of grants and make more awards. But he thought we had authority with the existing language. But if you want to make that change, that would be something that we would support. We haven't talked to House members about that, but I think they would understand if the total pool is less, we want the opportunity to spread the money around more. As for the discretion on the matching amount, the discussion around the range was largely kind of in response to COVID, and what communities' needs are now. Should we make it easier for them to qualify, as they recover from COVID, and as the communities get stronger and the matching ability strengthens, can we adjust that over time? And they were comfortable giving us that range. But I would say, just stepping back, our goal is to provide spread this money out to as many communities as possible. And we can do that through either adjusting the cap or the match, or use those in combination. If possible, we'd like the flexibility to kind of do it without having to come back to you and say, hey, this is not really working well, we need to adjust this. But again, you're the policymaker, so if you feel strongly one way or the other, we'll defer to you.
Okay.
So,
well, let me just say I'm not sure how. I don't know. I defer to our attorney, but I don't know how you could read this as that the minimum amount of the grant is $5,000. How you could award a lower amount than $5,000?
Oh, I think it was between, was it 5 and 50 or 20 and 50? I think
it's
is what it was.
5 and 50 now.
Yeah. So he said because there was a range specified that we could lower it, is what our attorney said.
You mean lower it below 50?
Right.
But still
But not-
5 or more.
Yeah. We don't. I think 20,000 is probably the right amount if we're looking at $1 million in total funding.
Okay.
So you want to take it? Do you want to keep the minimum at 5?
Yeah, I think that's fair.
And a maximum of 20?
Well, it could go higher, but you don't need to. Our attorney said you didn't need to change the language. We intended to lower it given the total pot was reduced. But if you want to lower it in statute, that's fine too.
And remind us what the average grant was. I know you had a lot less money this summer, but the average grant was pretty modest, right?
Yeah, I'd have to double check.
And it'll be different. I would feel that we might want to take the maximum down to 30, but I wouldn't. There may be projects that's warranted.
Right.
And I kind of.
I guess I could live with 30. I don't. I just even though your attorney says you could say to somebody who has a need for 50 that even though the statute allows for that, Internally, we're just setting it by ourselves at 25 or 30.
Mhm.
I think you invite trouble.
Oh, no, yeah, he was clear. He's like, you need to spell this out in your guidelines and make it super clear to you people what it is. So
Okay.
a clearer authority in the statute would be helpful.
Okay.
If I can, I pop in, a lot of people have, I know you keep talking about this and people keep using the words pilot program, but I want to just make sure you're all cognizant that this is being codified and that although there's only $1 million now, it would be a new program and a new fund set up in statute. So if you are looking down the road to put more money into this in the future, then I don't know if that changes your analysis on how you want to affect this language.
Right.
$30,000 is a pretty small amount when you consider projects that are upgrading, beautifying, or whatever real property. I'm hesitant to lower it, if for no other reason that it's much less likely that we will have impactful things done. I would rather have a balance of projects, including some that are impactful, because I think that would help inform us as to the value of whether or not to add money to this later on, since there's a limitation right now. So I would be very much inclined to leave that at the 50 rather than to reduce it at this point.
Okay. Well, my feeling on it is will be somewhat dependent upon how we decide the next question. So in subsection D, David and Chris, it says an applicant shall provide matching funds raised through crowdfunding, which is the part I really like about this bill, of not less than 25% and not more than 50%. Now, that would say an applicant can come in and on a $10,000 grant would have to provide $2,500 of crowdfunding and $2,500 of it would be a project that would be $2,500 crowdfunding, $10,000 grant, total cost of the project $12,500. So the amount of crowdfunding would only be 20% of the project, and I'm a little concerned that if this is being sold on a crowdfunding basis, that we're getting down to too little in terms of community matching funds. And I think it even gets worse when you use the 50% of the grant award. So I'm wondering where those numbers came from, and shouldn't we, at least at starting out, put an emphasis on the beauty of this program being that it could raise significant money and enthusiasm from the communities?
Yeah, I could say that the numbers were informed by the models in the other communities, in the other states, and what they did and what they found worked. We believe strongly that match needs to be a component of this project. We did get a lot of concerns raised in the House that rural communities would really struggle to be able to raise this match. And there was a lot of conversation about just removing the match entirely. So this is where we kind of landed in our conversations with House Commerce as a range was the way forward. We absolutely, insisted that a match had to be required because that's how you validate the project.
Right.
Yeah,
You think of towns with only 700 people in them, and that's an issue. I mean, Burlington is different from Reading.
Right. Yeah, without a match, I mean, we do have other programs that could fund some of this stuff in state government. What makes this unique is its crowdfunding matching requirement
Yeah.
and engaging people in the community to energize the community and to develop a sense of pride and use of these things. And I think if we don't shoot for a meaningful number, then we might not as well have this program.
Mhm.
So I don't know what that meaningful number is, um, and we started asking some questions here on this range concept
Mhm.
and adjusting the range. What if the town is able to raise 60% of the money? What motivation would they have to not stop at 50%?
Well, from the other programs, many campaigns are successful and they raise more money than what is targeted. And what they do with those, I mean, it's their it's their fundraising. In other programs, you meet the match, you earn the money. What they do with the additional overmatch is really, I think, the community's decision whether they do something different, do a larger project, or return it to folks. I just don't know.
Let's
I
get rid-
can, I can, I haven't done all the research on the different state programs. I can do a quick analysis for you to make sure that we're making a good decision on here upon the different match programs and lay that out to you.
I just think Randy had made a suggestion on this that we just get rid of the upper bit and just get, and I think Michael do a blend of what Michael was suggesting and Randy, that it be third, that the crowdsourcing account for roughly a third of the project, and that we have no upper limit on what could be raised or by whom. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
If we change this section just to say of not less than 33%, I would be okay with it and just end it there. And if there needs to be an adjustment, I think we need a little bit more time. We'll be back in January. They'll have some information, but we need a little bit more runway here to see how this is working before we give the authority to the administrations to start changing that. So that would be a lot simpler. I feel more comfortable if that was the case, and I would be okay with staying with the maximum and minimum awards under that section. I
Okay.
do have a question. If this in the appropriations bill or in this bill, everything I've heard is that we're going to try this for 1 year, see how it goes. I have a question why we are putting this in statute at this point. I mean, I guess, like I know when we did several things out of economic development in the Senate, it was in the form of session law. And why, if this is such a new thing and we're doing it and at least our appropriators say this is a 1 year function, why we aren't making this session law?
Do you want me to go? I don't know.
Well, I guess I would like to hear if David has any thoughts on how it got to that point, then we can hear from Chris.
They've already done a pilot project with a smaller scope, and the bill as introduced, H-159, was intended to permanently codify the program.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure. What do you think, Chris? You were going to say something.
Well, and the appropriation as proposed from the House was 5 million, and we were not going to use that in 1 year. We envisioned that taking, three or more years to actually use up. So that's beyond the scope of what session law would provide. And again, to David's point, we had tried it. it worked, and this was to expand it as a benefit of achieving the designation program.
Right.
And as far as the percentages, back, if we could revisit the percentages, I'd like to just check in with Richard. He's done a lot of math on different scenarios and what the percentages are, and there's a nuance to it that I've lost the details on. That let me just, if I could, just give you a quick pro forma spreadsheets on a couple different examples to help inform what your cap is going to be on the match.
On the crowdfunding?
Yep.
I understood you guys to say that there wouldn't be a cap, that it would just be a minimum
I'm sorry.
of 33%.
Yeah, the range of the grant and then what the percentage is. I have to go back and look at it.
So
But I just
D, and then there's section 4. Those two
Mhm.
sections are the two we're talking about.
Right. If I could just give you some quick math on what those look like, and so you could just use that to make a decision. This is the most quiet testimony I've ever heard.
I know what we're waiting for you. I mean, what are we waiting for? Are we waiting for your numbers, I thought?
Right, I can't send them to you now. I have to.
Oh,
I have to-
okay. I thought we were waiting on your numbers.
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry. No,
We were all
I-
being so extraordinarily quiet and patient. It's very like us.
at my age, I can do one thing at once on a
Okay.
good day. So I need a moment to come back. I'm sorry.
Okay, great. No, it's,
So I guess my suggestion or question for other committee members is, I'm not convinced this program should be in statute based upon the very limited pilot we did with federal funds. I think it's going to get it's going to have a different, be in a different context when it comes to general fund. If it's in statute versus a pilot, I think there's a greater burden of proof to show that we want to put general fund into it if it's not in statute. But if there's some reason to put it in statute, I would think we should have a sunset, either a date.
Michael, you muted yourself. Everyone's muted. I don't know.
Oh my God! All that I said was lost. I'm sorry.
no, I heard you.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you were muted too.
Keisha saw I was talking and I was muted. So I would support a sunset at the end of ARPA because this originally was designed to be something that went 3 or 4 years and to see its impact. So I think a sunset at the end of ARPA would make some sense, or at the end of whatever, that might make some sense, particularly if we gave it more money next year. At only 1 million, it's a little different, but by next year by next January, we'll have a much better sense of what our infrastructure jobs bill looks like, and that may fit in well into that, and we can finance it further through that. But I would sunset it after the ARPA. I'd parallel it with ARPA and then sunset it, but I'd keep it in statute.
Okay, that's fine with me. Okay, so the only thing that sort of remains here, I think, is how we deal with subsection D. And you are going to get us some information, Chris, as to what you've seen as an appropriate percentage of match in kind or otherwise to the size of the grant.
Yep.
Would it make any sense to tie it to the size of the project as opposed to the size of the grant?
It isn't a choice you could make. It just makes it easier for us to administer if they're all the same.
Okay. Okay, so we'll flag that. We'll wait to get that information in writing from Chris.
Thanks for the opportunity and the time to do a little bit more homework on this.
Okay.
I'm not good on the fly.
Oh,
Yes,
there-
you are. Yes, you are. Okay, so let's try and knock off one more before we take another 10-minute break. Yes.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to let everybody know Sarah Buxton, Amanda Wheeler had resent Sarah Buxton's testimony about why the department didn't want to do this at this point. Not that they don't want to do it, but that they didn't want to do it at this point because for bunches of reasons. And the Workforce Development Fund is their existing budget. So the challenge is that they'd have to take the money from the career and technical education centers for the study. It's unfunded, the study. She wrote the reasons for not doing it in her testimony, and it's just been resent to it. So it should be near the top of your email inbox from Amanda.
Okay.
So
We'll-
anyway,
we'll
whenever
take-
you're ready, I can chat further about that.
Let's take a look at that over the break if we can, and let's just finish the Montreal rep thing.
Yeah.
And then take a
Joan
10-minute
is, I
break.
think, still with us.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Joan is with us.
There she is.
So
Magic.
we had recommended that this money come from ARPA. We didn't make any real decision if it came from general fund, but I guess that fell through the cracks and the appropriations committee appropriated it from general fund. We can check in with them and, write something in here. It shall come from ARPA, but in the event it doesn't come through ARPA, then it would be funded through general fund. I don't know if there's any other language people want to change in this.
Can I ask a general question?
Yes.
Is there language that states that for everything else that is being proposed for ARPA funds? In other words, if it's not approved for ARPA, that it's going to come from somewhere else?
No.
So it's just DOA?
If the ARPA guidelines don't allow for something, I don't know how that would be dealt with, but our joint fiscal office has scrubbed it pretty closely, thinking that all the things that we funded through ARPA are allowable. For some reason, they don't think this one is, and the seed capital one is. And we really didn't make a decision in terms of a recommendation to appropriations as to whether we would want to go so far as to fund these things through general fund, but they apparently thought we did, and so they funded them through general fund. So on this one, I'm personally okay with this, whatever the source of funding is. But the only thing we told them is that we wanted the contract to start in January because we thought that would be the earliest it could start anyhow, and that might save some FY22 monies that they could use elsewhere. But I don't think they somehow didn't pick up on this and they just funded it fully. I wasn't in the appropriations committee, so I don't know whether they just decided they wanted to do this contrary to our recommendation or inconsistent with our recommendation, or they
maybe they felt,
They just missed our recommendation on it.
or maybe they felt it was too complicated to do the half-year thing.
Maybe, Maybe.
I think that from what I understand, it takes so long to get these contracts that if we're ready to go and the money's there, that by the time the contract is secured through the state, which is slow, that we would be ready to go in January. So I think it's probably fine. Is that correct, Commissioner Goldstein?
Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
So I think we're okay the way it is, and as long as they're able to start the contracting process now, because it's so slow, and then they would be able to have somebody consulting firm ready to go in January, early next year.
Okay, so so I don't hear any objection. We'll just leave section 9 as is. So we'll come back and we'll deal with Sarah Buxton's note, and then we'll move on to the state college language, which doesn't have any money in it in this bill. It's all in the budget. I think we probably could move fairly quickly through that. I'm pretty sure it's been scrubbed by other committees as well. Not anywhere near as far along as I had hoped, but let's take a break till 10:55, if that's okay with folks. And if you could take a look at Sarah Buxton's